In today's video, we'll be working on my 2008 BMW 335i. I'm going to be changing out the power steering fluid on my car. This should apply to a number of BMWs. I'm not just going to be sucking the fluid out of the reservoir and putting new fluid and calling it done. I like to get the car jacked up, and I'm going to try to drain the fluid out from the rack. And what makes my car a little different, which shouldn't really change things, but it's worth noting, my power steering fluid reservoir looks a little different because this car has active steering. As you can see here, the actual reservoir looks a little different. It doesn't have the typical screw-on cap here, but nonetheless, it is a reservoir with fluid. And I'm going to suck out as much fluid as I can out of the reservoir, and then we will jack the car up and remove one of the bolts that feeds your rack and pinion power steering and drain from there. I believe the fluid capacity of the system is about 800 milliliters, and I picked up the appropriate fluid, which I'll show you now. So most modern BMWs call for this fluid, whether you have active steering or you have regular hydraulic power steering. It is this right here, CHF11S. Now if we take a look at the actual cap here, it would say right on there what type of fluid it calls for. It says right on the cap, CHF11S. And yours may look a little different. It may have a green sticker on top letting you know if it takes that fluid or if it just takes regular ATF, but it's very important that you don't put the wrong fluid in your car. So first thing we want to do is suck out as much fluid out of that reservoir as possible, just so that there's less to drain when we're actually down at the rack. So I just purchased this pump kit from my local auto parts store. Just got an old Rubbermaid container here, and I'm going to take the lid off of this. And got my pump ready. I'm going to insert it in here and start pumping. So this is what the fluid looks like. Quite dirty. That's not how it's supposed to look. It's very dirty actually, so it's definitely time to address this. I'll compare it to new fluid just to give you guys an idea. Something that I want you guys to observe is you want to place the actual pump down on the right side and take a look at this screen here. Be careful you don't puncture it while you're busy sucking the old fluid out, but as you can see, they put these screens in to avoid any debris making it into your actual power steering pump or any of the system. Mine's pretty clean, not terrible, not perfect, but clean enough that I can reuse it. These are not serviceable. If you find that yours is completely caked up and clogged up with debris, you need to buy a whole new reservoir. The reservoir comes with a new filter, and they're not too difficult to replace. So keep that in mind when you're doing your work. You may have to change your actual reservoir. It will look something like this, you know. Like I said, this has active steering, so the reservoir looks slightly different, but the basic idea is if you have a clogged up filter, take a look when you suck the old fluid out. You may want to consider, or you should be replacing the actual reservoir completely, so that you have adequate flow. If you're having a whining power steering pump, that could be one of the reasons why your pump is whining. It could be getting starved because of a clogged filter. So keep that in mind. But I consider that decent enough that I can move on and we can carry on. So I'm going to wipe down the edge of the reservoir here, clean it up a little bit, and replace the cap so nothing else can get in there, and we'll jack the car up and go to the next step. So I have the reservoir adequately cleaned up now, and we'll replace the cap so no contaminants get in there while we're working down below. So there's our dirty fluid that we pulled from the reservoir, and just for comparison's sake, let's take a look at what clean fluid is going to look like. So that's what clean fluid looks like. You can see right through it. And this is dirty fluid. You can tell it lost its greenish color, barely any green left in it. It's mostly yellow and burnt up, and you can't see through it at all. Now that we've removed all the old fluid from the reservoir, next step is going to be to get the car jacked up and safely supported on jack chains. So we have the car raised now. The next step will be to go underneath the car and remove the lower splash shield. And to do so, you're going to need an 8mm socket, and there's a number of bolts. There's a few up at the front of the bumper, a few at the side, and whatnot. You'll see as you're down there. Remove all the 8mm bolts, drop down the splash shield, slide it back so we can see the actual rack. So I just got done removing this lower splash shield here. So that gives us, I'll slide that back out of the way, and that'll give us clear access to the actual rack, where we can look for the actual lines connecting to the rack and drain. So I suggest that you lay down some cardboard because things can get a little messy. Right there, one of the cooler lines. Like I said, my car has active steering, so the rack looks slightly different, but on your car, if you don't have active steering, you should still find a couple lines like so that actually screw into the front or back of it, and I'm going to undo that line and drain the fluid into this bucket. And ideally, if you have a line wrench, that would be ideal here to loosen that so there's no chance of stripping, but I don't have a line wrench that would fit that, so I'm using a regular 14mm wrench. But ideally, if you can, pick up a line wrench before you go to loosen that. So I'm going to try loosening that now, and I'll show you guys once I'm undoing it. So on my car, that was barely tight. It just took like a slight tap of the wrench to start loosening it. So, and as soon as I backed it off a couple turns, it started to drip. So I'm just letting that drip out now. I'm not going to remove that line completely because it'll just probably gush out and make a huge mess. So I'll let that drip out slowly, and then once it stops dripping aggressively, I will try turning the wheel left and right slowly, just so that it'll push out any additional fluid, and that should be a proper good flush. So it's starting to slow down, so I'm going to try backing this line off a little bit. I have that backed right off now. Now this could be a little messy. I'm going to try to avoid it spraying everywhere, but I'm going to try turning the wheel left and right. Oh, as you can see, that's why you want the cardboard, because it can literally go everywhere. Good thing I had that there. I'm turning the wheel very slowly. I'm actually just down here moving the wheels. If you can play your cards right and turn slow enough, you can just control where the fluid goes. So I'm at full lock one way. I'll try the other way now. For the drain, as you can see, the fluid's actually coming out of the line. I was just turning the wheels by hand just to see if if you can get all the fluid out of it. I've seen a couple other DIYs showing you how to remove the banjo bolts from back there, but I figured this is a good spot. It's relatively accessible, and I believe if you have if you don't have active steering, you just have two of these at the front, or even if they're at the back side, it's still better than going after those banjo bolts. And it's at a low point of the rack, so you know you pretty much get the bulk of it drained out, bulk of the system drained out, especially when you turn your wheel left and right. That forces any fluid out of the system from the rack and from the line itself. So I'd say that's pretty good. I'm going to restore that bolt now. I'm glad I noticed this. It was actually sitting in the actual pail of fluid. There's an O-ring. I guess I should have known or been a little more careful or looked out for that, but there's an O-ring right there that actually goes on the end of this line. If you can see right here, if I pull that back, you can see the O-ring slides onto there. So make sure that doesn't go missing when you're doing the work. So that's the O-ring there that goes in the end of that line. It's a black O-ring and it's a hardened material. I believe it's some type of special Teflon or high pressure O-ring. So make sure you don't lose that. Be very careful when you're removing the line. It'll probably fall into your drain pan. Maybe you'll want to buy one of these from BMW before you go ahead and remove that line, just so that you'll be prepared and you won't get stuck with your car disabled in case you can't find this after removing that line. But that's the actual O-ring there. You got to use the exact one that came off the car. One thing's for sure, this is a really easy, great place to drain the power steering fluid because very easy access. It's at pretty much the lowest point of the rack, and it'll drain out everything in the system quite easily. But like I said, when you remove this line, don't lose the O-ring. Be super conscious. Maybe order up a spare before you even tackle this. And when you're putting it back into place, you kind of have to slide this nut back, and the head of the actual line with the O-ring on it has to kind of go into a little cavity down in there. So you got to use your thumb to kind of guide it straight, and then you'll feel it kind of seat itself home. And once you've done that, if you hold this there with one hand and slide this nut toward the rack with your other, it'll pretty much go in nearly with your fingers, and then you just got to kind of finish bottoming out the nut with your wrench, and then you'll have a nice tight seal. If you don't do that, it can leak. But you know, as long as you use some common sense, take care. When you force the line into place with your thumb to kind of guide the tip of the pipe right down into its recess inside the rack, then you kind of self-align the actual pipe naturally, so there's no chance of cross-threading that. But just a tip, you know, like this could be a little intimidating or a little worrisome to some people when they're trying to do this. Try to put it back into place. If you don't, just calm down, take some time, make sure you guide everything into place appropriately, and make sure the O-ring is on there and properly seated home before you do a final tighten, because it can be slightly finicky to line everything back up and to make sure. So I would say if you're going to tackle this job, order up a spare O-ring before you even try this. As you can see, I've tightened that bolt up. It went in very smooth. I made sure it wasn't cross-threaded, and I gave it a spritz of brake clean just to clear up any remaining oil. And now we're going to take a look at how much came out. So this is what we got out. Luckily, everything went right onto that cardboard. As you can see, very important to do that because it's going to be hard to control where the oil sprays or where it ends up at. But without the spillage, we got about that much out. So there's very little left in there. You know, we probably did 80-90%, maybe more. And we have what we took out of the actual reservoir over there. Now we're back up at the top, and we can go ahead and start filling. So I have fluid in the actual reservoir now. So we should start the car and start moving the wheel left and right to work out any air bubbles. Right now, the way it is, I'm just past the max line, but as soon as I start the car and circulate fluid through the actual system, that's going to drop dramatically. I'll go ahead and start the car now. Before anything, actually, I'm just rotating the wheel left and right. See if that helps work anything in. Yeah, that actually dropped the fluid level considerably. Okay, so we're at the max line now, and I'm going to start the car. I start the car now, pump's a little noisy. Tons of air bubbles, we gotta work those out now. That's normal after a flush. All the air bubbles are getting pushed to the reservoir at the highest point, and eventually that bubbling will stop. I'm gonna turn the wheel left and right. While we're waiting on that, we'll take a look underneath. Make sure it's all dry. Nice and dry. That's the line that I took off. When you're bleeding like that and you go to lock, don't hold it there. Just get it close, but then move back. You want to go to the end of the steering range, but don't hold it there. To give you guys an idea, the wheel's straight right now. We're going to go one full turn. That's 3/4 of a turn. Not full turn, and we got locked. Now if I come back to center, straight, so that's 3/4 of a turn, and if I do another 3/4 of a turn, full lock. So from this full lock to opposite full lock, we're gonna have 1.5. Just to give you an idea, if you've ever wondered what's the difference with active steering. It's nice if you want to just literally, if you watch here, it's like nothing. Takes some getting used to if you haven't driven one of these before with active steering, but once you get used to it, you'll love it. If you want to do a quick evasive maneuver in a parking lot, etc., it's really nice. So there we go. All the bubbles have came out. We'll check our level. And I'm right at max. You can make that out. It's crystal clear. So I got lucky, pretty much got it on the money with the last fill. Right on the money at the max line. And just to give you guys an idea, you'll use a lot of this. You'll use pretty much 80% of this container. There won't be very much left when you're done. So one of these will get the job done. The capacity of the system, I heard, is 800 mLs, and this is 1,000 mLs. So, you're using about 80% of this, and kind of confirms based on how much is left in here that we've done a full out flush. So that's going to conclude this video. It shows you how to flush your power steering fluid on an E90, whether you have active steering or you have regular power steering. So thanks for watching and good luck.
Wow.